Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Game for Thought. My name is Ali Weiss. I am our ethics coordinator here at Hoest Digital Arts and Entertainment, also commonly called DIE, in Kortrijk, Belgium. Thank you so much for joining yet another one of our episodes where today I am super honored to be joined by our guest, Christian Cantamessa. Christian, thank you so much for taking some time to chat with me about your career, about the games industry, of past and also of present and of future. Christian is best known for his work as lead designer and co-writer of Red Dead Redemption and the Manhunt series, and also very well known for his work on the Grand Theft Auto series as well, which I'm sure that most, if not all, of our students are very familiar with. So again, it's such an honor to have you here. Thanks so much for taking some time.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Let's just dive right in. So I'd love to know a bit actually about your break into the industry. So early, we're talking 90s, you are preparing to enter the games industry. What did that look like for you? And how did you experience your very early days in the industry?
Um, yeah, well, those were very different times for the video games industry, and I'm really aging myself here. But when I actually initially started looking at video games was the early 90s, and I was a teenager. I was maybe 14 or 15 at the time, and I always wanted to be making films. I was actually at the time making little films with my friends, video camera films that we would initiate with big ideas and abandon halfway through. But I started playing video games. I was never like a hardcore sort of video game player as a kid, but I ended up playing, mostly story-driven games in the adventure, point-and-click adventure genre. And I remember playing a game called The Secret of Monkey Island, and very vividly thinking, this is like a movie that I'm playing. The characters were so well written, and the dialogue, and it felt very cinematic. Of course, looking at it now, you know, the industry has even become more cinematic. But at the time, you were looking at The Secret of Monkey Island on one hand, and you were looking at very non-narrative games like Doom, or other sort of like straight up just Twitch gaming. And so I felt like there's something here. There's something about telling a story, which is what interests me, that could be original and different. And so I stupidly thought maybe working in video games could be like a launch pad for my career in film, the way commercials was for Ridley Scott, and music videos for David Fincher. So I kind of became a little bit obsessed about working in video games. But remember, I was 15, so I kind of had to kind of try and fail and do little things, and sort of like just inhabit that sort of like do it yourself and do it with friends and sort of space that it was very difficult in the 90s to kind of turn up in anything professional.
Right.
And then what happened is that as I went on, study writing and trying to get into film school, um, I had created sort of like a network of friends that I kind of had done failed games with, or at least experiments in trying to make games with. But some of those people spoke about me with other people, and and I literally got asked by an Italian game developer, because I was living in Italy at the time, so we're talking 96 at this point. I was asked by this developer if I was interested in writing a story for a point and click adventure game they were making. And this point and click adventure game was being published by Team 17. So like even back at the time, Team 17 was a very well known entity. The Worms games had come out and were selling blockbuster numbers. So I kind of remember um, thinking, oh wow, point and click adventure game is what I was looking at to kind of get into games. And so I kind of jumped at the opportunity. And basically, they said, "You just write a one-page outline, and if the publisher likes it, we'll hire you to write the whole thing." And so I wrote the one-page outline. And obviously, if I'm here today, no
I
spoilers,
think they
but
liked it. I have
they
a
liked
vague
me.
inclination that they accepted it.
And so I was hired to write my first game. And because it was a point and click adventure game in 3D with a 3D engine, very, very sort of like um, early days 3D, but it still allowed me to kind of learn game design as well, because you don't just write an adventure game and just write the dialogue. You also have to write all the puzzles, and then from there I kind of started to figure out how you put the puzzles together in these rooms, and using an editor which was a far cry from Unreal 5 as far as you can, but still, it kind of taught me something. And from there, when the gig was complete, because I was just hired literally for that particular piece of that particular game. Um, I then was able to get a job at Ubisoft. Ubisoft had just opened a Milan studio, and so I was able to kind of send my resume and say I just finished work on this game. It's not even out yet, but would you be interested? And I got hired there, and I went, and then from there, like once gaming used to be, and I have to say used to be because now I think this is changing a lot and very rapidly. But it used to be much more like an industry, much more like the Hollywood studio system of the early days. And so making games was a job. It was a career. It's quickly becoming different, like I was saying. But back in those days, you would get a job and then you would be able to kind of grow in a company or get hired by another company.
Right.
And so that's how I ended up then working for Rockstar, etc.
It's incredible how you ended up at Ubisoft, and then you were then working on Disney's Donald Duck Going Quackers. I don't know if anybody out there ever played that game. If you did, let us know. And then your next work after that was on GTA with Rockstar, and I'm curious how the shift in genre, how you experienced that going from Going Quackers to the GTA series, actually.
Um, yeah, that the contrast there is almost deliberate because I was working on Donald Duck, and actually I was working on the Game Boy Color version of the Donald Duck game that Ubisoft was working on. It was a multi-platform game, and they were doing the big sort of like console version. I think it was in Canada. And then we were doing the Game Boy version, the Game Boy Color version. Um, and I was sort of both writing the story, which on a Game Boy Color version, you can imagine what that means. It was just little text panels at the beginning, and also doing level design. So I actually learned a lot at Ubisoft because working as a level designer, you're basically given an editor which is a lot more sophisticated than the editor of a point-and-click adventure game, because you're actually building we were building a platform game, and so you're actually building the game. Like the coders are giving you the little pieces to put in, but then you're the one that's responsible for putting the game together. So it was very hands-on, game design and level design, and what you play. Either me or another level designer has built for that game. It doesn't go through 600 people. So it was very sort of creative and an immense learning experience. And after that, after shipping Donald Duck, I moved on to a Rayman game, which became known as Rayman M in Europe and Rayman Arena in the United States, which was a multiplayer Rayman game. But I was never incredibly cut for writing and creating material for um, like a super young audience. Like I think it's great. I think these games are awesome, and some of my all-time favorites are, games like, for example, from Rare software, Rareware in the N64 era. So Banjo-Kazooie, Banjo-Tooie, Donkey Kong. So there is a difference between enjoying, playing Astrobot and being great at creating Astrobot. And
Right.
certainly now, I actually potentially have shifted a little bit in my career because I can at least um, see the appeal of these stories because I have a child. Um, but
Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
back in my mid 20s, I was a very different person, and I was in a very different part of my life, and I was in a very sort of angsty part of my life. And so, like
Right.
every writer and every creative, you sort of project into what you're doing your own self and your own life. So I was craving to tell stories that were inherently darker and edgier and kind of fit my worldview back then better. And then when I saw online that a company called DMA Design in Edinburgh, Scotland, was working on the 3D adaptation of a top-down game that I loved called Grand Theft Auto. I had played Grand Theft Auto on a PlayStation, and I remember just being blown away. I was playing Grand Theft Auto while I was working on my first adventure game with members of the team that were working with me on that game, and we were just like, we can't believe that they even released this. It's like it was that controversial back in the
Right.
days. When GTA 1 was released in the UK, there was a parliamentary inquiry over the release of that game. It was that big, like the British Parliament, the very sort of like staunchy, serious politician talking about a top-down video game on a PlayStation. It makes me laugh today, but that really happened.
It's incredible to like go back and see actually what waves were created by a game like GTA.
Right. And so I kind of saw these previews, and some of them were negative. Some of them were basically saying, I remember one in particular saying it'll never work. Like these guys are, squandering the property. There's no way that they can do what they're promising, and it's just gonna lead to disaster. And so I read that preview, and I was like, I want to go work there. I don't
And
know.
you're
There,
like,
there
I
was
want to
something
make it
like
happen.
I just want to be with those guys. It was like
Right.
when you're thinking of, you hear a demo tape of a band, and you're like, I want to go play with that band. So, or at least I want to be a groupie of that band. I sent my resume. That's all I did. I sent one resume. Actually, I think I sent two resumes because I wanted to move from the Donald Ducks of my career.
Right.
I'm not gonna say the other company I sent my resume to because it's gone anyway. It doesn't exist anymore. But I also sent it to DMA Design, secretly hoping that they would invite me for an interview. They invited me for an interview. I did the interview, and I was hired. I was hired pretty much like day off. So kind of like I came home and I quit my job and I moved my entire life from Milan, Italy to Scotland. And yeah, I had one bag. And in my bag, I had two bags. I had one bag with my clothes and one bag with my Nintendo 64 and a few cartridges. And that was it.
Wow. That's incredible. Did you accumulate more bags during your time in Scotland, or did you stick to the two bags?
My move to the US was significantly bigger. But that's also because I was older, and I think I wasn't you know as dramatically stupid as I was when I moved to Edinburgh. I basically decided that would be like Cortez going to the New World and burning the
Right.
shit. I was like, I'm moving to the UK. It'll be a new me, a new life. I don't
Yeah,
need to
yeah,
bring
yeah.
anything other than my consoles and my games. Like my console, because I only moved with a Nintendo console.
Wow. What a special time. I think that that must have been, and really exciting since I mean you were in the beginning of your career, and that I think was a pretty significant like first move for you. What was your experience like first working on GTA? So GTA 3. What were your major either personal or professional takeaways from that period?
Right. So I joined DMA Design, and I keep saying DMA Design because that's how the company was called. It wasn't called Rockstar yet. Rockstar
Right.
was the publisher, and it was based in New York City. But the company, the development team was called DMA Design, and at the time it was owned by Take-Two, and so consequently it was part of Rockstar, but it still bore the original name, DMA Design, the storied sort of Amiga developer.
Yeah.
Um, and I was 24 when I moved there. So
Wow.
I moved in the last, I want to say, 6 or 7 months of GTA 3. So my job on GTA 3, um, which is largely uncredited, was just play the game, because it was fairly advanced in development, and sort of like give feedback, give ideas, sort of a glorified QA, if you will, because
Exactly. I was going to say like a bit like QA.
but I was one step over because I joined as a game designer, and so I was actually reporting my suggestions and my critiques to Leslie Benzies, who was the at the time director of development, and then president, and then the rest is history. But like the producer of GTA. So I was reporting directly to him, and that kind of created a relationship that we kept all the way to Red Dead Redemption. So the sort of like you play the game, and then we talk about it, and then Leslie became sort of like the in future games, not on GTA, but in future game became sort of like the enabler of so many of my ideas and so many of the craziness that I wanted to put in these games, because we had that relationship where I joined DMA, and he kind of set me in front of a PlayStation dev kit and said PlayStation 2 dev kit and said play the game and tell me the things you like, the thing you don't like, and um, you know and then
Just a lot of
that's your
agency
job.
there.
That's your job.
Yeah.
There was a lot of agency because the team was very small.
Right.
Um, and I also worked a little bit with the character programmer, kind of do some character and camera tweaks, and like I was kind of jumping around, literally more like learning than
Yeah. Yeah.
anything. Um, and then what I'm credited for is I actually did a bunch of voiceover for the game, and I ended up being credited as an actor for the game.
Like, what was your major takeaway from, if I know it's difficult to kind of look at that entire period and just pick one personal takeaway before then you enter the manhunt era, I would say. What was your takeaway from that work, the kind of wearing many hats period with GTA 3?
Well, uh, first of all, every day I was sort of like in awe of what was happening, because it's really difficult to realize what GTA 3 meant when it was released. The seismic impact it had on the industry, that level of agency, and that open world space that you could just drive, and if you would see something, like I kept thinking of like Legend of Zelda, for example, and how it gave you that sense of a big world that it's so interconnected. But I also kept thinking of like the loading times and the gates that take you from one big level to another big level. And going into GTA, there was none of that.
Yeah.
It just felt just one big piece, and one big piece where you could just find creative ways to go. You could steal a car and pile one car on top of another car and then climb on top and get somewhere else, or um, and so just the playing with that product before it was released was just sort of like, what is this? It's like an alien corpse that you have in front of you. You know, like it's a flying saucer. You're like,
Yeah.
I've never seen anything like this. And I was coming from Game Boy Color games and the beginning of Rayman Arena was on PlayStation 2, but it was very early days. And
Hmm.
again, it was a level-based game. So I was coming from like almost like living in a 2D world going into this incredible change of perspective. So every day I was just in constant amazement, and also like the caliber of the people I was working with, they were
Hmm.
so much better than me that the only chance I had was to play basketball at that level, because otherwise I would be on the bench all the time, or at least that's what I was thinking.
Right.
So being surrounded by people that are better than you, it just makes you want to do better.
Hmm.
And I can flat out say that I was given a shot because everyone there was better than me.
Yeah. Were there any moments during that period where, because you were surrounded by everybody who at least seemingly was just, yeah, I mean, super incredibly talented, and maybe you had a bit of imposter syndrome, I don't know, but did you feel like intimidated at any period, or was it more of a motivational factor to
I
be on their level?
It was more than intimidated. I also, for a good month, I was thinking, what have I done and how do I go back? But
Yeah.
remember, Cortez got to the New World and burnt the ships. I burnt all the ships. I didn't have a house to go to. I didn't have money to go back, and
Hmm.
I didn't have, all my belongings were in a suitcase. So I literally had no option but I had engineered for myself a point of no return. So either I
Right.
make it work or I go live under a bridge in Leith, Scotland. So, like, which for those in the audience that don't know, Leith is a district of Edinburgh where the movie Trainspotting and the book Trainspotting are set. So it wasn't a particularly nice area where the office was. Um, and so, you're either surviving or you're on a road. So that helped. It gave me the freedom to be like, hey, I got nothing to lose because I'm a rock bottom already. I got no money, and I literally, I moved there, and I literally had no money. And so the studio head, which was not Leslie, it was Andy Semple, another great guy. He literally had to give me 200 pounds to eat for the first time before I got paid because I had no money.
Wow.
And so I had to tell him the little money I had to pay 2 months of rent for my apartment because
Hmm.
I don't have credit history in the UK. And I didn't expect it to be so expensive. So I give him them the 2 months, and now I have no money. And I'm literally surviving on, yogurt and pot noodle at the office. And he was like,
Yeah.
here's 200 pounds. Just go buy yourself a meal and do some groceries. Um, so it was that bad.
Do you ever look back on that period and reflect on the difference between then and now, and you're like, and just be like, oh my gosh, that was
Well,
me.
not often, but I'm doing it now. And
Yeah,
it's
sorry, because I'm forcing you to.
but like in your 20s, everybody in their 20s, they do crazy things. So, that was, I guess that was my sort of crazy thing.
Yeah, I mean, but it's super motivating to our students as well, because I mean, a lot of them are that age. And I think also, I mean, we have students graduating in a couple months, and they will be in that position where they have to take sometimes like really terrifying move and try to break into the industry. And so I think, I mean, your story is obviously really inspiring.
I think the industry was also, I want to caution everyone that the industry was also very different back then.
Very
So,
true.
I think everybody should take their great risks, but they should do it um, because they feel like they have, they have the right opportunity. For me, like I said, there was the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, and I was willing to give it all to make it work. And once that's when you have that fire burning, I think
Hmm.
it's okay in the 2000s, and it's okay in 2025. Like that doesn't change.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to jump then after GTA 3 to Manhunt, which I actually talk about. So I'm like, where am I right now? I talk about Manhunt in the class that I teach for our first year students here at HOEST DIE. And so obviously you co-wrote Manhunt. I'm super curious to know about your inspiration for the story behind Manhunt. What motivated you to write this game and create the game? Were there any inspirations?
Yeah, so Manhunt is an interesting chapter of my life, and certainly a game that I still, a very controversial game that I still love, but also, um, it's clearly a product of those years of my life, of my youth,
Mm-hmm.
if you will. It's almost
Yep.
like you're looking at yourself, you're looking at photos of yourself when you have your goth phase, and you're
Right.
like, okay,
And you're like, who cut my
I was
bangs?
I was that. I was wearing those clothes. I had that haircut. So, but like everything, it's what we create is a reflection of ourselves and of the other people that worked on it, of course. Um, I was actually the lead level designer on the game as well as the co-writer, which back in those days at Rockstar, that kind of meant the most senior creative figure on the team, sort of like the equivalent of being a game director.
Yeah.
So I was able to have like maybe an unduly large influence on the product, and also I had this relationship like I've explained with Leslie, who was the producer of the game, together with Andy Hay, and so I with both Andy and Leslie I had a personal relationship where I would be able to twist their arm and trying to get my ideas into the game. Um, so it is also weirdly a very personal game. And I know it's very personal for me, and it was very personal for Alan Davidson, who was the other one of the other writers, and also like the main concept artist, and possibly I want to say art director of the whole game, because it was also like a personal passion project for him. We spent just a lot of time, mostly in pubs, talking about what we could do with the game. Um, and I guess for me, it was just my desire to make a statement, and that particular statement was a statement about violence in media, um, violence in video games, um, but just like the how we relate the appetite for violence, and and I guess like part of it was motivated from what Sam Hauser, who was the head of Rockstar, sort of had told me at the time when he was evaluating earlier drafts of the game design, and he basically really wanted a horror game, like a scary game. But he said, I don't want any fantasy stuff. Like, I don't want any vampires. I don't want any zombies. I don't want any ghosts. Like for Sam, like the scariest situations was like the human violence, not
Right.
the fantasy violence. Like literally, when you're being chased by a gang of criminals on the streets of New York after you get out of the subway, that is scary.
Hmm.
That's real, as opposed to when there is a zombie chasing you, which you can at least say, well, it's scary now. It give me a jump scare, um, but I know that zombies don't exist.
Hmm.
Well, human violence is true. It exists. And so I was motivated by these two sort of polarities, right? I want to say, doing something that was maybe a little more meta and a little more reflective, and maybe I was, too too young to be able to really convey sort of like some of those ideas, and also like this idea that the real human violence, is a lot scarier than just fantastical violence. And when you clash the two together, I think you end up with Manhunt. Like being chased, you know, by these gangs in an abandoned place for the entertainment of other human beings is innately, scary and inhuman and dehumanizing, and
Yeah.
it kind of went from there. And then of course the director of the game is us. It's the game developers telling you, game player, are you having fun yet? You're being, you're being sadomasochistically punished so hard, but at the same time, you're enjoying. You're enjoying.
Yeah. Yeah, you said it's super interesting. You said a bit earlier that part of it it's just was a reflection of who you were at the time. Like you said, it's like looking at a mirror, kind of, or a picture of you at that moment in your life. And you also said you wanted to kind of make a statement about violence in media at the time, or violence in games. What kind of a statement were you hoping to make?
The statement was that the there is an appetite for violence in media, and there is a cathartical element of violence in media, and everybody is it is very easy to be hypocritical.
Mm-hmm.
And also the other statement that I feel everybody kind of on the team wanted to make was video games are not any lesser than film or television or literature, and we can handle it. We can
Yeah, yeah.
do it. We can do it in a way that can be serious, and it can be, um, a piece of art, if you will.
Yeah, a legitimate
If you
form of
pass the art,
culture.
yeah, or at
Yeah,
least a product of the culture of the time, and so it, deserves to be treated with respect, and not just something that you can say this is the equivalent of pornography. It
yep,
is not. And then,
right.
of course, a large number of, well, several regulators didn't see it that way, but I do think that that's also reflective of the mentality of the time. And at the
Mm-hmm.
very least, we initiated that conversation not just with the traditional architecture of great game criticism, which at the time was largely games journalists. We also initiated a cultural conversation with, bodies in government. We initiated conversations with, people in censorship boards, and like at the very least we got there. Like at the
Yeah,
very
and
least we put it
yeah,
on their radar.
exactly. And that's why I talk about this game in my class, because it's the first, or first major example of bringing the conversation of violence in games. And I think the level of graphic violence in media as well, in games specifically, it brought that conversation to literally a global conversation. Um, I'm wondering when, for example, there were conversations about censorship and banning the game in several different countries. Is that something that you ever anticipated when you were making the game? Or was that completely kind of unexpected, and then it happened and you were like,
Yeah,
oh, wait a
it
minute.
was unexpected, and it was post release. So at that point, the game was out,
Yeah,
and as a testament to Rockstar, but also maybe to the technology of the time, the game is out. You can't hot patch it, or day one patch. Like that's the product that we
yeah,
created, and we
right.
have to embrace it. And I never heard anyone from the company from 1 second saying, "Hey, let's go back to New Zealand or Australia with this other version of the game." It was like, um, they they're lost.
Did the criticism, I mean, obviously there's huge critical acclaim of the game. There's obviously a whole community of people who still talk about the game in a very positive light today. With regards to the criticism of the game, did it impact, and I guess you can also say the same in a different light for GTA San Andreas, for example. Did the criticism of the game impact any future writing or approach that you had toward game design or game writing?
Well, I can't speak for other people, and when I say this is I'm not trying to hide behind anything. Like I don't have any personal recollection of that impacting anyone else, and it certainly didn't impact me.
Yep.
If anything, when I wrote the design for Manhunt 2, I took the quote from the New Zealand board that says this game as the level of violence, I'm paraphrasing, that makes it injurious to the public good, and I pasted it at the front in the cover of Manhunt 2. I think it was a commentary, and we wanted a
Yeah.
commentary. So that's part of the conversation. You can't just want to initiate a conversation and then say, "Oh, but um, you know, we said something wrong," like you need
Right.
to stand by what you're saying. And then of course I didn't complete my work on Man 2. Man 2 was finished by another team because I moved to San Diego to start my work on Red Dead Redemption. But and the team that developed Man 2 did a commendable job, and I think they took some of the work I had done and contributed to many better ideas um, to that game. And they were still very kind to credit me,
Hmm.
credit my work, and some writing was there and some writing wasn't there, like in movies and TV, like other people come on and they add to the scaffold.
Yeah.
But certainly, I personally, and I can speak for the company or for anyone else, but I personally never felt like being part of the conversation is a negative thing. I don't think um, even the censorship boards, they weren't coming from a place of like, we need to jail this person or these people because they've done
Yeah.
something wrong. They were simply also contributing their line to the conversation, and their line
Exactly.
was, you know, this is the way we see it. And I'm sure that today there would be a completely different reaction to something quite frankly as tame as Manhunt, because Manhunt is relatively tame when you compare it to other things that we see in media today. Manhunt came out before Saw. So we came out, and then sometime later, the movie Saw came out, which actually
Hmm.
has a lot of the same aesthetic, the sort of CCTV aesthetic, and the grittiness of the whole
Hmm.
setup, and somebody playing a game with human lives, and Saw is a cult movie and a great franchise, and I think it's deals with similar themes, and it's potentially even more graphic.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I think the world has moved on.
Speaking of moving on, you did mention Red Dead Redemption. And so maybe we'll jump right ahead to that as well. Red Dead Redemption, obviously another game that has a huge following still today, absolutely. I'm wondering how your process and experience writing for Red Dead Redemption was different, or how it compared to your work on Manhunt and GTA.
Um, well, it was different in that the stakes were very different. Like the Manhunt team was, maybe a 20 people team. I don't have the list of credits in front of me, so I hope somebody doesn't go there and count them. But I do remember it being very small, very small compared to, certainly compared to the Red Dead Redemption team and then the teams from today. But it was in the 20s as opposed to in the hundreds.
Hmm.
Um, and so like the stakes were immediately higher. Also talking about the talent of the people that you work with. Man, it was me and other people on the team writing. We're also wearing other hats. Nobody at the time was just writing.
Yeah,
Um,
jack of all. Everybody was a jack of all trades, basically.
yeah, like
Yeah.
Alan was also the art director and the concept artist. Multiple hats. It's a small team. You move over to Red Dead Redemption. I'm the lead game designer of the game, so I'm in charge of like a large group of people the design team was like 40 people alone. And then I'm also creatively in charge because of that, of the whole direction of where everybody's going, because it's not like I'm in charge of the engineers, but if the engineers are building a feature, at some point I said to someone, that's a feature that we should be building. And so, you wear a lot of weight on your shoulders, not just me, but, the leadership team, the lead designer, the technical director, the art director, and the producer. It boils down to like a handful of people having to say yes or no to the work of like hundreds of people. So the stakes are, immediately higher. And then on top of that, I'm working with like the team itself was incredible talent again. Not that the Manhunt team wasn't, um, but but also the writing team. Like I ended up collaborating with Dan Hauser, who is the at the time was the president, the vice president of everything creative at Rockstar. So I'm now working hand in hand with the most senior writer in the company, and Mike Hansworth, who had just been hired, and another incredible writer, like just a person of incredible talent. And so, like, on the one hand, you have the stakes of the game that you're working on. On the other hand, you're working with two other writers that are top of their game, and so you're like once again. And I've just moved from Scotland to San Diego, um,
With more than two bags?
with more than two bags, but
With more than
still,
two bags.
the culture shock alone. I mean, you are like an American living in Belgium, and I was at that point an Italian, Scottish expat now moving to Southern California. The weather alone. I mean, I left Scotland. It was raining, and it was in the 50s Fahrenheit. And I moved to San Diego. It's sunny and 80 degrees in
You like
December,
shredded your rain jacket.
and
And we're like,
Edinburgh is like
goodbye, I will
really
never see you
old,
again.
medieval, kind of gray with the splotches of green because moss is growing everywhere. You go to San Diego, everything's flat. There's the ocean, the palm trees, the air. I remember the air smelled of like flowers. And I'm like,
Oh.
what is this? I felt like I walked into like some sort of movie set.
Yeah, I
Miami
think
Vice.
on top of everything, I mean the weather is just so it's such an extreme change that I'm
Yeah,
sure that that was an extra layer to the shock of getting up
yeah,
and moving
the whole
everything
thing.
again.
So I'm working with these people on the writing side. I'm working with this new team on the design side and on the game creation side. So it was just, I don't know if I'm answering your question, but just
Yeah,
psychologically, it was another huge, huge change in my life. Like another big hit
absolutely.
of the reset button, if you will.
Yeah, yeah. Did I guess because the way that you describe it, it's a obviously you had a lot of responsibility working on Manhunt, for example, but I think in such a huge team working on Red Dead Redemption, um, were there any like I guess personally, did you experience any growing pains or was it kind of difficult to make the mental switch to working in such a big team and also having so much responsibility?
Well, the growing pains or the pains in general, you experience for every project. Right? Like you
Yeah.
experience them if you go from like a game that you're making to a completely game that you're making. You experience it if you go from like a country to another. I personally experience it every single time I'm doing something. There is a moment where I'm always feeling like I'm stepping a little bit further in the ocean out of my comfort zone, and so that's something that I deliberately try to do, but also makes it uncomfortable. And also makes
Right.
it something where, if you can, you want to take a few steps back. And sometimes in my life, I've been unable to do that. And sometimes in my life, I have been able to do that, and I shouldn't have. Certainly, San Diego was one of those moments where, um, it's make it or break it. Not because I couldn't go back in the UK, because at that point, I had a much more of a personal income to be able to kind of uh, go back, or not that I couldn't get another job because at that point I had shipped 5 games.
Hmm.
I had also shipped GTA San Andreas, so
Yep.
like I had a good resume. I think that the big thing was there, you know, like like Sam told me when I moved over, he said, if you screw this up, I'm gonna send you back, which I took to take this seriously.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
is a shot. This is a shot we're giving you. And
right.
if you drop the ball, like the basketball analogy again, like here's the ball. You took the pass. Now you gotta run and play the ball. Otherwise, you go back home. And so,
Yeah,
like, I
yeah.
took that as a challenge to myself, and I think that that's kind of it's what motivated me to kind of try and do my best.
I'm very curious to know in such a big team as well how maybe the writing process has or differed from previous projects when comparing to Red Dead Redemption. Were there ever times, for example, where there were disagreements within the writing team in terms of where the story should be going or different, I don't know, like subplots that are going on within the game?
Well, I have to say, actually, I don't recall any disagreements because we were um, just really on the same page in what we wanted to do. And certainly there was one level of, we're all serving the game. So if there is a need that arises out of the game, then we need to service that first.
Hmm.
But Dan and I and Mike really just wanted um, to tell the story, and we were kind of like really well partitioned as well in a way. Like I was in the team, I was embedded in the team, and Mike and Dan were in New York, and Mike kind of came over towards the end of development. We kind of embedded him into the team to do more of what I was doing.
Hmm.
But fundamentally, I was, there day to day, so I was able to kind of um, wrap things up faster. I was able to be like, we need this piece of the story, we need that piece of the
Hmm.
story. I was also able to kind of create a structure of the story early on because we needed the structure for the game. And a lot of the story in a game like that um, needs to allow people to build the game. Like
Right, right.
this is the character that you control, and this is the character that you're building. So I need to give you something to make, and I need you to build some missions, at least initially. So, I was able to create a lot of the scaffold of the story early on, in movie terms that you could call it an outline, but it was
Hmm.
maybe at points it would be a lot more primitive than an outline because I don't want to take away from the work that Dan, for example, did or that Mike did. But then from that, straw man, if you will. Working with Dan, it was always about, like it would just go off into a cave and come back with the pages that, of course, you just don't want to touch. And or he would come up with a character, and he would be like, "I'd love to put this character into the story," and maybe I had another character in mind, and I would be like, I was thinking of this other character. Is there a way where we can fuse them together, or I love your idea much better, or you would say, I love your idea much better. So like we were always just coming from a place, writing, especially early on, it can be very free flow. If you're working on an outline, if you're working on a sketch, not every piece has been plugged in. And
Hmm.
at that phase, it's possible for somebody to come back and say, I think this would work better that way, or I think, or I'm gonna take this chunk and I'm gonna come back with a
Right.
revision of this chunk, and so that's kind of like how we worked. And then when you're in production, then you just segment it, and it's like, okay, you're gonna do this piece of the writing, I'm gonna do this piece of the writing, and Mike is gonna do this piece of the writing, and then you just hope that that you follow the tone, right?
Right, right, right. That it
And
all matches
everybody
up
is on
together.
the same page. Yeah,
Yeah.
and so there's a lot of paying attention. And like I want to say that Dan was maybe the one that had certain characters more in tone, and so we would be like, okay, that's it, that's what we're doing. And there would be some other characters that Mike would be more in tone, and then we would be like, maybe we would be like, why don't you write these?
Right.
So then you just adapt, right? You just
Yeah.
you just adapt to
Yep.
to
Yep.
what's needed. There's a lot of writing to do. So
Something that really interests me about Red Dead Redemption and the gameplay. And in my question list that I had, I compare it to and they're two very different mechanics, but there's the violence meter, for example, in Manhunt when you are going for a kill. And obviously it gets more graphic as the violence meter goes up. And then in Red Dead Redemption, there's the honor system where a character, depending on what that character has done, or the interactions that you choose as a character, you can develop honor or lose honor in the same way. And so the way that other characters or NPCs might approach you, their response depends on your level of honor. I'm super curious to know a bit more of where that honor system came from, where it originated, how it originated.
So the character of John was developed, and in conversation with me and Dan in particular, so that very much following the experience that Dan had done in GTA in the GTAs, and also compatibly with some ideas that I had about westerns and the particular western we wanted to tell. A very revisionist western, a sort of like
Yeah.
our theme was the death of the West. It was like you're coming to the sunset of the cowboy. So in these conversations with him, we really agreed that we wanted to give him a background that would allow you to commit evil and to be good at the same time. And ultimately, that was possible just with the figure of the reformed outlaw, right? So John is running away from his past. He now lives with his family, hiding somewhere in the Great Plains, and and the past comes back to haunt him. And so that past is still him. That past is still alive in him, and and we know that he's capable of robbing a bank because he's done it. But we also know that he desires better, or he desires to do good. He's capable of doing good because we find him in a moment where his life is very rural and pastoral, and he has a son, and obviously marrying and having a child changes you as a person. And so, like, he embodies these two. He embodies the honor meter at its lowest and the honor meter at its highest. So we started out with a character that could do that basically could allow you to hijack a stagecoach, but also save the rancher's daughter.
Right.
And then someone in the design team, and I don't remember who it was, and maybe it was just a conversation. It wasn't me, but somebody in the design team said, we should make this explicit. This is very cool and it works and we like it,
Mm-hmm.
but why can't that pay off into the game? Why does it have to just be a story thing?
Mm-hmm.
And so when game designers then start to do their thing, then of course it became a much bigger piece of the game. And I feel that in turn made not only the game better and more interesting, but also made the story better, because now we have a target and we're like, well, this is him. We really need to support this meter.
Right.
Otherwise, you're going to
Right.
create a big gap between what the story is doing and what the game is doing.
Mm-hmm.
So that
Mm-hmm.
then the two things kind of started fueling each other.
I think it's an incredible way of depicting morality within a game. And I also think that that's also why a lot of people can resonate with this character and resonate with the game, because the character is neither innately good nor evil. And I think that also says a lot about humans in general. I have another question actually from one of my colleagues. Dries, if you're watching this right now, I'm asking your question. Dries was curious to know if the story of Red Dead Redemption 2 was already fleshed out when the original was being made, or if there was kind of like a skeleton outline of what RDR2 would look like? How did
Type
that
3.
come to shape?
Type 3 is a good question. Um, yes and no, in that I left the company way before RDR2 was started, and and I certainly never work with, the idea of like what we're gonna put in the sequel. As and fun, and I would have never done that with Red Dead because I would have never bet that it would have been a sequel. I thought that the game would have
Huh.
been a failure because nobody wanted to play a
A
Western, and
Western. Yeah,
and we were
exactly.
being told that much by financial analysts and you know members of the gaming press, like this game is gonna, is gonna be a failure. So I was coming out the gate thinking, here goes my job. But at
Wow.
least I was doing what I believe in, which is what I've been doing since Manhunt. If I thought that Manhunt would be a massive mass market success, I wouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
So no and yes. Yes, because the story of John Marston exists. The backstory, well, the story of John Marston into the present of what you do in Red Dead Redemption exists because of his past. You're revisiting your past sins, but going after the people that you were committing crimes with,
Hmm.
because that story is so much about finding these hiding gang members and either killing them or returning them to justice, until the very end with Dutch. And as you do that, you expose the backstory of these people and the backstory of your life and the relationship that you have with this sort of like father, mythological father figure that inhabits the end of the game. Um, and so we had to create a scaffold again. We had to create a structure to support that ongoing story because so much of it is reflective of the past. Um,
Hmm. So yeah,
you
there was kind
couldn't,
of
yeah.
already that
So we had
skeleton.
those characters, like we had Bill, we had all of them. We had Dutch. We had the idea. We had Uncle, right? Like we had all
Yeah.
these characters. Uncle, you're hiding in your rent. Like what is he hiding from? Like John, what is he? Why did he leave the gang? Right? Like you have all these questions that we never answered,
Hmm.
and but they were there because we needed the story in the present to function. And so I can see how some of that could then be used to inform Red Dead 2 because you're now creating a prequel, and so if you are creating a prequel, you have to kind of connect it.
Hmm.
It's just inevitable, like
Right.
you can't do Rogue One without Star Wars. Like they literally dovetail one into the other. So
Right.
I think that the story of Red Dead 2 was in part, at least in part, written when we wrote Red Dead Redemption.
Sure.
Um, but then, of course, it was further developed because now that backstory becomes the present. The basics and the characters were there, yeah.
I wanted to ask one more question about Red Dead Redemption, and then we'll move on. There was an extensive level of research that I've read about for while developing the game itself. I want to hear about your experience with the level of research that was done for this game, and then I guess my second question would be that there obviously is heavy depiction of Native Americans as well within the game, and I'm very curious to hear about the research process in terms of authentically representing the Native American population.
Um, Yeah, I mean, Rockstar honestly is phenomenal, or at least was phenomenal when I was working there, for the attention that they devoted to research. For San Andreas, they took everyone from Scotland to LA, and embedded the team with different uh, figures locally that could show different realities, from the music business to like the more dangerous parts of the city. So for Red Dead, you can't do something like that because it's the past. Like they as much as the Rockstar loves research, they couldn't build us a time machine. But
If only. That
certainly
would be really cool.
that would be cool. So I can say that we traveled, like you said, we traveled a lot. Sometimes the whole team, sometimes a select group of the team that would then be able to share memories and photographic images. We rode horses, we shot guns and revolvers and rifles. Um, like we kind of took on some of those experiences that we could. And then I personally am an avid reader, so I was on the plane flying to San Diego to this new job, and the book I was reading was Blood Meridian, so like Cormac McCarthy's sort of like seminal western. So I started reading and doing research before I even started on the job, and that's something that I've done for all the projects I've worked on. And then and it's just a personal thing, but also Rockstar as a research unit. And so we would get, PDFs, like massive documents about anything that could be useful for the game. So some of it was like the Pinkertons, the birth of the FBI, and the role of government in the United States justice system, so that we could create those two guys
Yeah.
and their backstory, or a study on um, the early days of like the traveling cinematograph and how the imagery would look, so that we could create a tiny detail in a village.
That's
um,
incredible.
so we would get just pages and pages and pages from these people, these amazing people. They would just go and frankly do the hard work for us of either um, finding the information in the libraries or interviewing people. And so to answer the second part of this question, we had an exhaustive amount of material on Native Americans, from conversations with Native Americans that were summarized for us with questions that we wrote. Um, the problem of representation, the reservations, how they changed um, through the years, the creation of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, like this entirety of material that was created for our consumption, so that everyone working on any specific part of the game could just go and read it and make an informed decision. So we have Native Americans in the game, and we have a Native American, non-player character that is fairly significant, and everything that we wrote in there was coming from these stories, these things that we were reading. Some of the horrible, stereotypes that these people were subjected to. We actually then actually decided to create a character, the character of the anthropologist McDougall, that would just spew some of these terrible things that we were reading. Like he was like, "This is so important that we need to create a character." Like that
Yeah.
example I was telling you about character, Dan coming over with like, we need to have this character. That was one
Right.
character that for him was immensely important because of the stuff that we were reading from this research. And it's like we
Yes.
we will never be able to put it out there if we don't have a character that is really inhabiting it for the people to see. It's sort of like Mad Men when you're seeing the pregnant women drink. We
Right.
we needed that sort of like that counterpoint
Explicit.
to life today.
Yep.
Um, so like some things in research you can do in person, some things you read, and some things we were lucky enough to have a team that would just help us out.
Props to Rockstar for providing that the exhaustive, I guess, amount of resources for the research of the game. Speaking of Rockstar, you've said in previous interviews that you admire Rockstar and admired the company when you were there for having the balls to make the kinds of games that they have made. And I guess in 2025, I'm curious to hear your insight in terms of values that a company should have or that you would admire if they do have.
Yeah, well, first of all, that quote I used, I'm not taking it back, but that quote I used because that was I literally said that to Leslie Benzies when he was interviewing me to get my job on GTA 3, and he said, "Why do you want to work on this game?" And I said, "Because," he said, "Why do you want to work at this company?" And I said, "Because you are the only people that have the balls to make this game." And he said, "You're hired." So that's how kind of how it went. And but I still believe that having the balls to do something, at least for me personally, and this is extremely personal, every person in the industry will give you a different answer because every person in the industry treasures something different. But I do happen to treasure the ability to take chances, particularly creative chances. Or I wouldn't have started my own studio with Davide Soliani, my co-founder and creative counterpart, and I would have stayed in a cushy job, you know, just just doing my work and doing my work well. But I do believe that taking chances and taking risks and doing things, like I said, just going out into the ocean a little bit further, where you now are
Right.
starting not to touch anymore. That's very important for me, and I always felt it was something important at Rockstar as well. I always felt like they were the trendsetters, not the trend followers.
Yep.
And
Yep. Yep.
so that's where, that quote, if you will, is applicable to me.
You mentioned that you've started your own studio, and you've also in the past years really done a lot of work in film, as well. And I'm sure you get this question all the time, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. Storytelling in games versus storytelling in film, or other media. What are the main differences? What are the main takeaways you've had from experiences working across multiple different forms of media?
Um, well, it is a good question. There's a reason why,
Why it's
it is
asked a
interesting to
lot.
people. And I don't have a stock answer also because it kind of transforms. The answer transforms over the years with, games changing and film changing. Certainly, the two have commonalities and have differences, and saying, oh, one is interactive and the other is linear is a little bit like saying, you know um, a light switch is interactive because you can flick it, and and a cup is not interactive because there's no light switch. It's like it's very limited as a definition. When I went into film, I was coming from highly cinematic games, and I was coming from a place of writing. So it's not like I was, and also having done motion capture and cinematics. So it's not like I was coming from apples and oranges. I was coming from maybe tangerines to oranges.
Right.
And so, my experience was very applicable, but also, in certain areas, games pay more attention to certain things, and film pays more attention to other things. And so, for example, while games are very character driven, some moments of character can come from your player relationship with the character. So I can make you do something in game, um, or even just handing you the controller that immediately creates an umbilical cord with that character. In a movie, you have to create that umbilical cord just with the writer. There's no there's no other way to do it. And so if you don't know that, that's something that you need to learn, because it's something that you would have to learn if you're a writer coming from film and now you're dealing with the game medium, and like you don't want to do that. You want to do it in the game. So
Right.
someone has to learn the ropes somewhere.
Right.
Um, and so I would describe it as really like adaptation, like the job of adapting yourself
Hmm.
to the different ways these media operate. Also, the production is very different. Games have longer, at least they used to. I don't know what's going to happen now, but traditional games had longer stretches and and are incredibly iterative. So you can
Hmm.
try something and be even utterly convinced that it will work, and it will not work, And more often than not, the best way to do it is to kind of just keep going. Just put it
Yeah.
out there. Don't overthink it. If it doesn't work, it's like sculpture. I'm just gonna go with the chisel and make it work. Unless it's completely misguided and it still pays off because at least you could see that it will never work. In film, if you do that, you're done. Like when you're shooting, you need to be shooting. You're spending $1 million a minute, but not that much. But you're spending a lot of big movies are. You're spending you're burning an incredible amount of money. It's like shooting a rocket into space. When you turn on those engines and they start burning the fuel, the rocket has to go straight or it will blow up or it will fall on someone's head. So like you don't turn on the rocket boosters until you've done your math. And it's just two different ways of working because you can work on a script and the film industry is incredibly tailored towards really understanding what they're getting to build out of the script as a blueprint. And then
Mm-hmm.
there's like extensions of it. There's the storyboards, there is the production design sketches, there's key art, and they end up being fairly representative. In games, I can do all the storyboards I want, but if I don't play it, I will never know if it works.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's just the iterative nature is very different. Film iterates in post production, particularly in the editing room. That's where you get a chance to iterate. And if you have the money, you can do reshoots. If you don't have the money, you do ADR and cheat. And if you're really desperate, you just have to cut and come up with a different version of the movie. But that's where you can sit there and iterate and change. In games, that phase is the production.
Yeah.
It's how a game gets put together. And actually, if you don't do it, it's my personal opinion that you're not going to end up with a good game.
Yeah.
Um, so there is some element of improvisation on a set, but I want to say it's more like this is the scene, and now we can move within this scene, and you guys actors are bringing something to the table, and it's awesome, and I want to capture it on
Yeah.
camera. But it's still that scene, and it's very, and we still have 10 hours to 12 hours to make it work.
Mm-hmm.
And a game is a lot more we have a little more time and actually we want to show up and iterate as much as we can,
Right.
and then throw it out if it doesn't work. If you throw out the scene during production, what are you going to film? Like
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
don't have the
Exactly.
time. You can be Stanley Kubrick and write while you're shooting, but even with the unlimited talent and money that that guy had, he was still writing the pages for the following day. You're still just there is a train coming.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
so it just works. The production methodology is different. The the way certain element of storytelling, like I said, operate differently on different visceral levels.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but other than that, you know, I thought I could go from one to the other, and I can go from one to the other fairly interchangeably,
Mm-hmm.
and you just need to wear a different hat. And
Yeah.
I want to say you just need to learn. Like my
Yeah.
biggest problem going from games to film is that I didn't know enough about film, so that's on me. It's certainly, if I wanted to go from video games to rocket science, I'd better study some rocket science.
Studying rocket science. Last question. You've been up to many cool things in the past years. Fill us in on what you've been up to lately, and what's exciting and to come in the life of Christian Cantamessa.
Thank you. Well, one will be a shameless plug for the studio that we just
We love
launched.
shameless plugs on Game for Thought. All the
Thank you.
shameless plugs.
Well, I started a game studio called Day for Night with Davide Soliani of Mario Rabbids fame, and I can't say anything about the game we're working on, but we are having a lot of fun working together. Davide and I both started at Ubisoft Milan back, and if you recall that part of my story, so I met him there, and I've known him for 30 years, something like that. So it's really great. We always stayed in touch. We always, you know, played each other games, and it's really nice finally to kind of go back. First of all, because it really feels like a return to something. You know, it feels like um, going back to making games a certain way with certain people, you know, friends, smaller team, um, more, you know, more risk taking, more out of the comfort zone. So that's really great. I'm really enjoying every day that I'm working with him and with this team. And and I, you know, that's what's consuming most of my time right now. I also continue to write, but right now my film writing is, you know, taking a little bit of the back seat, and my game writing is, you know, where all my attention is. Um, but you know, I have a couple of projects that I actually ended up, you know, writing prior to starting this company, and the way Hollywood moves, you know, it takes you know, 10 years for something new to start. So they're they're making their way through the system. So we'll see what happens.
We will see, and we will cross our fingers. And a
Thank you.
huge congratulations on starting your own studio, Day for Night Studios. It's incredible, and we wish you all of the success with that new chapter as
Thank you.
well. Any last words for our audience, students out there who are studying here or somewhere else, games or film or digital media, game devs out there who are in the industry, maybe have had a tough time in the past year, 2 years? Any words of wisdom for the audience?
Yeah, well, it's really tough out there, and I feel terrible for all the people that have been affected by layoffs. You know, it's tough, like you're saying, and people trying to start out, and you know, maybe the apprehension of what, you know, the state of the business can kind of give them. And I want to say at the end of the day, it's attrition. This is a war of attrition. It's like it's really for those that can stomach it and can sort of like stay the course, and, you know, and keep going. There is just a lot of rejection, and there is just a lot of rejection in every creative endeavor, certainly any endeavor worth doing, in my opinion. If you feel like what you're doing is worth doing, and you can accept the rejection, not because of you, but because you live in a creative industry where the rejection is safe. It feels safe for those that reject you. It's the default choice, it's the easy choice. So if you don't take it personal, but you take it from those people coming from a place of safety and rejecting fear, and if you just embrace the path and you keep going and you keep going and you keep going, I think that eventually you'll get somewhere. It certainly happened to me, and I think that, you know, you will see those that didn't have that burning passion. You know, they'll fall off, and eventually the crowd will thin out, and eventually you'll go somewhere. But also, I would say, you know, be open to where you end up to, because, you know, I certainly didn't expect to be making Donald Duck games, and I embraced it. I didn't expect to be making a Western game, and I embraced it. And I didn't expect any of the things I made to be even mildly successful. So I think it really is a journey of attrition, and it's a journey.
Thank you so much, Christian. It's been such a pleasure to have you here and to hear about your journey and where it's taken you and where it will take you as well. And I'm sure great things are to come. So thank you for joining us. Thank you so very much. And thank you to all of you out there who have watched this episode of Game for Thought. Stay tuned for the next episode and go ahead and subscribe to this channel as well. Bye, everyone.